Phil Heath is one of the GOATs of bodybuilding. Outside of King Ronnie Coleman, Phil is the greatest bodybuilder of all time. This is a hill I will die on. But recently, I've been comparing his amazing 2011 version to the current top guys. Samson and Derek have both been through this matchup already. Be sure to watch those videos. But if Samson and Derek got compared, I think we should go ahead and complete this trinity. Samson, Derek, and Hadi are the top bodybuilders today. They have one Olympia title and one Arnold title apiece, and they've all three been top 3 at the Olympia back-to-back these past 2 years. So this is it. We are going to compare Hadi's best version ever against Phil's best version ever and see how close Hadi can get. And since he's the last to go out of the 3, we'll look back and compare not only his results, but how Derek and Samson did as well. With all that out of the way, let's go ahead and jump into today's video. Remember, if you guys like these types of videos, be sure to hit the like button and subscribe for more. All 3 of these current guys, including Hadi, were able to put up pretty good fights against Phil in the front double, but he proved too much for all of them thus far. For Hadi, I do think the shot is underrated for him. The shape really does catch your eye and he has every body part. But Phil is just too much, simply put. And we all know he's not that structurally gifted, but he's just too developed. In the legs, I prefer Phil slightly for the fullness. I like how they look, but you'll see in other poses that I can go slightly back and forth here. Hadi is pretty good size-wise and he has more maturity and more of that graininess, but we can't forget the calves either, which are part of the legs, of course, and Phil takes those. Then in the lats, I have to go with Phil for being thicker and a bit wider, at least in this shot. And finally, there are the arms. I mean, Hadi's are average at best, and Phil, in my opinion, has the best arms of all time for the combo of everything: biceps, triceps, and forearms. So the only thing I prefer on Hadi is the waistline. But Phil's waist back in 2011 was tight. The abs are deeply etched, and the whole X-frame is quite good. So no, Hadi will not be going against the grain and winning this one, but he is holding his own here, I will give him that. It's a great pose that just happens to be next to Phil Heath. Samson and Derek were strong in this one too, like I said, but for different reasons. But none of them could topple one of the best front doubles ever. But we gotta pay attention to the margins here for Hadi like we did with everybody else, and I do think it is close. In my comparisons, we give the winners of each pose 2, 3, or 4 points for small, medium, or large wins. And to reiterate, there is nothing wrong with Hadi. Again, I think the shot is in fact underrated, but it's not enough to defeat Phil. It will be enough, however, to just hold Phil at a 2-point margin for our first pose. Next, we have the front lat spread, and between all 3 of these matchups, this was probably the closest pose on average. It is Phil's weakest after all because of his narrow structure. Hadi, on the other hand, is really wide in the shoulders and the lats, especially for his height. And he wins in terms of the width and in the lats, but he loses everything else. Well, the legs are again up in the air, but I do prefer Phil for this pose. I can really see Hadi's imbalance here, but again, he's got that old man muscle and the details. Phil is still pretty separated though. Hadi does have some more serious shortcomings upstairs. First off, he has the pointy delts. They're worse in other poses, and they've been worse in other packages, but they're still sus AF here. And his outer arms are flat and the forearms are skinny, and this is where Phil really excels. Even in the chest, which is a little weird on Phil because he's narrow, Hadi's pecs really flatten out here and don't have any detail at all. However, these are all still kind of bonus things. The main events are the width and the lats, and Hadi wins both, so it's really hard to argue with that even if you're Phil Heath. So to get some more context here, I went back and looked at Hadi in the 2024 Arnold Classic lineup, because everyone there was bigger than him, like Phil is here. And honestly, looking at this pick, I think Akeem is probably the best in this shot here, but I actually don't have any issue saying Akeem would beat Phil in this shot. But in this lineup, Hadi is second and Samson is very close. And in Samson's matchup with Phil, I just barely gave it to Samson. So I think I'm going to do the same here. I think if Hadi can hold his own in that larger lineup, he should be able to do so against Phil, especially if Hadi can do so against Samson, who I had beating Phil. That's going out on quite the limb though, I understand that. Feel free to tell me I'm wrong in the comments, but I don't think it's that outrageous to give this one to Hadi. Phil always struggles in this one, and Hadi won the most important aspects, so it's not completely unfounded. And now Hadi actually finds himself with a narrow 2-point win. Now we have the side chest. For Hadi, this is a pretty standard pose, a pretty polished one. He is looking clean, but he gives up a lot of thickness to Phil. Now only if Sam Arrayes would give his thickness up to me. In the side leg, Phil has a little bit more of a convincing win. He's bigger than Hadi with slightly better separation and some feathering in the glutes as well. Next, in the midsection, this is kind of tricky. Phil is more detailed, but he has some slight rounding to the stomach. Hadi isn't as detailed because he isn't flexing down like Phil, but instead pulling up. and keeping the stomach tight. So all in all, I do see arguments for both here. Then in the upper limb, Phil beats Hadi. I mean, I don't think anyone is a match for Phil in the arms from the side. From the front and back, maybe you can find some guys out there, but from the side, probably not. The arm is so thick and that forearm sticks out so much you can't even believe it. On top of that, Phil takes the delt on size alone, but he's also more capped off, and Hadi is a little bit more cone-like if you catch my drift. Now on the chest, they both have flatter pecs, but Phil is still a bit thicker and a bit more detailed. So overall, perhaps the difference on this one isn't the most obvious thing, but it's still a bigger win for Phil. It doesn't even necessarily come from the pecs as much as it does from everything else. Nonetheless, he wins up top and in the lower body, so I think that warrants a pretty solid 3-point victory. Of course, I'm sure you all expect the rear double to be a blowout, and yeah, it pretty much is. It's self-explanatory, Phil is the clear winner. However, I do think Hadi is solid enough to hold him off from a full 4-point win. I only give out 4 points when the gap is massive and there's basically no opposition from the winner's opponent. Well, Hadi is solid. I mean, he has a complete and conditioned lower body and his back is dense and fairly detailed. This is a decent shot. However, that's not good enough going against Phil. Phil edges Hadi out in lower body for being sharper in the glutes and maybe a tad bigger overall, but it's closer downstairs. The back is actually kind of similar in terms of the actual musculature, but it's literally like having a 2D drawing versus an actual 3D model. Phil is much thicker overall and more detailed. He also wins the arms and delts yet again. Hadi's triceps look like they're starting to recede a little, and he doesn't have the size in the biceps nor the forearms. And once again, the delts look a little weird. But you know, overall, I still find Hadi to be pretty solid. So do I give Phil a full 4-point win just because he's that much better? I don't think so. At least that's what I have been doing in my matchups, and I'm going to keep it that way. Hadi's rebuttal is extremely faint, but he has a pose. This isn't like an Akeem Williams or a Horse MD level back pose. It's not great, it's not on Phil's level, but Hadi isn't getting swept in my mind because he does have at least something going on. So yes, Phil's win is large. No one would ever think to give this to Hadi, but I think he does just enough to keep Phil at 3 points here. This is not rage bait either, this is what I did in Samson's matchup too, and again, that's how I try to use the scoring system. You can't get swept up if you have a rebuttal, even if it's not the strongest. We have the second back pose now, and you might assume this will just be a repeat of the last pose. On the contrary, this is neck and neck. Hadi is massively underrated. Yes, the rear double is average, maybe even slightly below average, but his rear lat spread is one of the best ever, and I'm not even joking. If I ever make a top 10 list of best rear lat spreads of all time, expect to see Hadi somewhere on that list. Everything you want in this pose is on Hadi. The lower body is all around solid and complete, and the back has every quality. He's wide, wider than Phil, and he's still pretty thick, especially in the erectors and traps. So yeah, I have no problem saying he's pushing Phil. Phil does win some aspects too though. He takes the lower half yet again just slightly because he's more detailed. In the back he is thicker, the lats, traps, and erectors, they're also 3D. His back is more developed than Hadi's, I guess you can say, but he is missing width. All in all, I did think about putting Hadi ahead here, but I don't think I'm quite ready to do that. I mean, that would mean Hadi would be in the top 5 or 3 of all time in this pose. That would mean he's right up there with Dorian and Ronnie as well as Phil, and I don't know if I'm ready for that mind just yet. But when I do make my top 10 best body parts list, I will have some serious thinking to do. So don't be surprised if Hadi lands ahead of Phil there. But right now I have him just slightly behind. My reasoning? I love Phil's rear lat spread. More than his rear double actually. But let's really be fair and objective here. This is probably 50-50. So let me know down in the comments if you are biting the bullet and have Hadi winning. I'm curious just how many of you think that way. Like with the 2 previous Phil videos, we have to use photos from 2010 and 2008. He did do both variations of this pose in 2011, but there just wasn't a clear enough pick for my liking, and since we used these photos before, we're going to use them for this final installment. Anyway, the main matchup here is between Hadi and Phil from 08, as he's hitting the standard traditional pose right there. In the side leg, Hadi is solid, but Phil is bigger and drier, so he wins there like he did in the side chest. He also wins the tricep. It's part of the arm, so it's really a no-brainer when it comes to Phil. Hadi is not that impressive size-wise, nor is his tricep that much separated from the rest of the arm. Phil, on the other hand, has one of the thickest horseshoes ever and still brings striations in it. Pretty crazy. But when it comes to the torso stuff, I do prefer Hadi. The pecs are kind of close because Phil is fuller, but I like the detail in Hadi's far pec. And like the arm was for Phil, Hadi takes a solid win in the midsection. That's another no-brainer. Phil is decent, don't get me wrong, but Hadi is peeled and showcases great obliques and abs because of that. Overall, these are pretty solid poses. They're both streamlined, Hadi more so by a bit, but Phil is thicker and also has the namesake of the pose. Hadi does have that stellar midsection going for him though. It's kind of close, but I think I like Phil just a bit more here. I can see an argument for Hadi though. But what really sold me on giving Phil the pose overall was the bonus variation. I love when Phil used to hit the side try like this. He never shied away from the actual pose, but this variation is a cherry on top and it's still from the side angle. It's not like the front tricep that we see from some guys nowadays. With that, Phil clinches the pose. I could see 3 points going to him here because he does have 2 variations, but I'll keep it at 2 points. And I'll tell you why after our next pose. Next we have the abs and thighs. Hadi's signature pose and truly one of the best ever. But a testament to Phil's completeness is how well he holds his own here. The legs are pretty close yet again. There's more fullness to Phil's. I like the shape and insertions, but Hadi has that grainy quality over him yet again and is overall very shredded. The upper half is a little more conclusive. Phil has a solid 4-pack, those abs are blocky and etched in, but the taper isn't the best. But to be fair, Hadi's taper isn't the best here either. I'd still say a little better though. What's definitely better are his abs and obliques. The overall core showcases more detail and development basically. So yes, this pose is going to him, but I'm pretty conflicted on the margin. Phil is not weak at all. He loses the abs, but he's still solid, and he will be winning the legs half the time as well. After struggling with this for a bit, I decided that I felt pretty much the same as I did in the side tricep. Could I have made that 3 points? Yes. Hadi really holds his own there, but Phil probably beats him in the standard variation and tacks another one on. Well, I feel in my gut that it's pretty much the same here. I'm just having trouble quantifying that. So I decided to make these last 2 poses the same margin. Whether it's 2 or 3, it doesn't really matter because I'd give them the same thing. So because Phil got 2 points in the last pose, Hadi's going to get 2 points here. After Hadi's signature shot, we have Phil's here for our final pose. It's the most muscular, and he showcases 2 great variations. I have to say though, I am very surprised by how well Hadi holds up between 2 Phils here. That's not easy to do at all, especially for a smaller guy like Hadi. But credit to where it's due, he stands out and he does catch my eye. Honestly, there were a lot of little surprises like that for Hadi in this comparison. No, he's not sweeping Phil, but I've been pleased to see how well Hadi holds up against one of the best Mr. Olympias ever. That is a relative claim though, because I think you can figure out by now he's not winning this comparison. But anyway, unfortunately in this shot there's not too much he can do, but he's doing all that he can. He's not going to beat Phil on size and thickness in either variation. Those are the main aspects of this pose and they both go to Phil. But in terms of detail, Hadi is insane, and I'll say it, he beats Phil in detail in this pose. Now Phil has plenty of detail, but Hadi is sharper in the midsection, the pecs, and has the muscle maturity in the legs again. To reiterate, Hadi is a smaller guy, so the only thing he can really do is to be impressive in the detail, and he's 10 out of 10 in that department. And I understand Phil's photos are a little blurry, but I still think Hadi is slightly better in terms of detail. He's already one of the most shredded guys from the front, but nowadays he has that old man muscle too. But enough about that, because Phil wins every other aspect. Not only is this pose his signature shot, but his signature 3D quality is absolutely abundant here. The arms and delts on Hadi look like twigs next to Phil, the legs on Phil have more sweep to them as well, and the chest is double the thickness. And I'm just talking about the hands clasped shot right now. After you factor in that insane crab shot too, it's an easy win for Phil. But I'm going to do something that's probably going to be a little controversial. Hadi's detail and the impressiveness that comes with that does not go unnoticed by me, even in between 2 10 out of 10 most musculars. So it's going to be like the rear double was. With how much I raved about how good Hadi is, how could I have him losing by 4 points? I just don't think that's fair. It's hard to make it a sweep because Hadi's not only bringing a complete pose, but a terrific pose. One that catches my eye even in a comparison of this magnitude. So I'm going to hold Phil's margin off slightly at 3 points. Let me know what you think about this choice, but I think Hadi does just enough to warrant this decision. Next, we have the second round of judging the 4 overall physique categories. Here we are looking at the total physiques on 4 categories: condition, shape, muscularity, and flaws. Let's start with condition so we can continue with some slightly controversial decisions. Nowadays, you don't really get condition like Hadi's anywhere else. Besides Nick Walker, actually. He's been the most consistently conditioned athlete of our time. But anyway, if you compare Hadi against anyone from this era besides Nick, Hadi is going to win at least by a narrow margin, if not more. But he's not winning today. I find between Phil and Hadi, it's pretty even. From the front, I'd say Hadi's a bit more detailed by a hair, shredded core, gradier quads, probably more striations in the pecs. However, from the back, I'd flip that statement. Phil had more detail in the lower body by a slight margin and a little bit more in the back. But both guys are close in the half that they lose, so I'll make this a tie. I'd really need to see them under the same lights with the same camera to make a more solid decision since it's razor thin here. If you're curious though, I'd probably slightly lean towards Phil, but again, I'm not confident. Speaking of ties, let's go to the shape category. Both guys aren't known for their aesthetics really, even with their most aesthetic versions. However, I still find each guy to be pretty aesthetic for modern bodybuilding, just in a more unique way. They're not cut from the same cloth as a Sean Roden or a Flex Wheeler, but Hadi still brings a very tight waist. And while Phil is a bit narrow, his X-frame was great at this point in time. Both are slightly blocky. Again, they're not typically what you think of when you hear the word aesthetics, but they both have physiques that more than work for open. So I'm going to make this a tie too. For all intents and purposes, they're kind of the same, and I couldn't make a confident call either way. Then we have muscularity. For me, I'm saying Phil does just enough to get into the territory of a 3-point win. Hadi is very complete with a good amount of size on his frame, but Phil is the king of completeness. He is the most complete bodybuilder ever. And on top of that, he's bigger than Hadi just straight up. So while Hadi isn't bad, Phil is definitely better in each facet of muscularity. And finally, we have the flaws category. Phil gets a last-minute bonus here to pad his margin. His only flaw is that he's narrow, and that pretty much has already been accounted for. Hadi, on the other hand, only has one flaw, but one that sticks out. Literally. It's the delts. I've seen them worse, sure, and there are definitely worse cases running around, but at minimum, you have to call these noticeable. So it's pretty simple. Phil is going to shore up a final 2 points to close this comparison out. Alright, now it's time to reveal the final scores and get some review on the previous 2 matchups. Now, of course, going into these comparisons, we all knew Phil would win, but I wanted to see how close these 3 guys could make it. Well, not very close actually, not even Hadi. Phil won this comparison with a commanding 78.5 points to Hadi's 21.5. Now, Hadi didn't win this comparison, but he did do the best out of the 3 competitors. Samson only got a score of 15.1, and Derek did a little bit better with 18.6. But let's talk about why Hadi did the best here. I think the main thing is that he's complete. Everything is there. Samson couldn't hold a candle to Phil's condition. That was a major gap for him. And Derek did lose condition too, to a lesser extent, because while he's great in some areas, in others he's very soft. Hadi could actually force it to a tie here. He was simply more detailed than Phil in some areas, but Phil got him in some others too. Shape-wise, all 3 guys did pretty well. Derek and Samson won, if I'm not mistaken, and Hadi kept it at a tie, so he was pretty on par there. Then in terms of the poses, Hadi had very little weaknesses in these shots. He could look good in pretty much every pose. Samson and Derek, on the other hand, have a couple of poses that are objectively pretty weak. Hadi was actually able to get some wins here. He won that front lat spread, Samson did too, and with Derek it was iffy. But then Hadi also won the abs and thighs. He was also able to keep the margins closer on the poses he didn't win because again, he's very complete and well-rounded. His weakest shot was probably the rear double, and I think that's still okay enough to keep Phil from demolishing him. And then the other back pose was 50-50. That could have been a Hadi win just straight up. So that more than made up for the first back pose. Now Derek and Samson do have some pretty standout points, and I talked about them in their respective videos, but they have some weak points as well, and that hurt them in their matchups. In bodybuilding, I think the adage of styles makes fights actually applies pretty well. Why is Phil so good? Why is Phil one of the greatest of all time? Nothing on him was missing in 2011. Well, why was Hadi so good at the 2024 Arnold Classic? Everything was pretty well accounted for. Hadi with his 2024 package is probably the most well-rounded physique of the past several years. Not the biggest, not the most shapely, but still very good in those regards, and his condition was impeccable. It's very hard to find weaknesses in his physique. But that's enough of the Hadi glazing, because as good as he is, he obviously isn't beating Phil, and there was almost a 60-point gap here. That does say something when the best physique of the 2020s gets beat by 60 points. But all the same things I said about Hadi apply to Phil, just more. The shape is very good for modern open bodybuilding, the condition was very close, but then Phil is just so good in every pose. Hadi is too. He has every pose at like a 7 or an 8 out of 10 on average, but Phil is not scoring anything below a 9 out of 10 in any pose, even in his weakest shot. And then poses like the most muscular and back shots are pretty much perfect. You can make at least one of those poses an 11 out of 10. And that certainly adds up when you go through every single shot. Hadi is very complete and whatnot, but again, 2011 or 2013 Phil, whichever one you prefer, that is the most complete physique of all time, period. That doesn't mean he's the best ever. Ronnie is still better in my mind, but Phil definitely beats him in certain aspects, and that's why he'd beat anyone today, every day of the week, and twice on Sunday for Derek. So if there's anything we've learned from this little experiment, it's that. Derek and Samson are going to do roughly the same amount of damage in my eyes. I'd maybe rank Derek as the second strongest out of the 3 and put Samson in third for condition, but Samson has the size going for him. They also judged slightly different, so are we bringing Phil into the 2020s or are we sending Samson back to 2011? That's going to decide that. But I am pretty firm on Hadi leading the pack here. I've said this many times, but I do think the 2024 Arnold Classic version of Hadi is probably a top 20 physique of all time. However, even in the very upper echelon of bodybuilding, there are still levels to this. And Phil is miles ahead of anyone competing today and pretty much anyone to ever walk on a bodybuilding stage. Well, that's going to do it for today's video. Who do you think would do the best against Phil out of these 3 guys and why? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments. And if you guys like this video, be sure to hit the like button and subscribe for more. And if you guys want to get your hands on some high quality supplements while supporting my channel even further, be sure to head over to Arms Race Nutrition. Then to check out, use my code Project10 to get 10% off your entire order. That's code Project10 at armsracenutrition.com. And finally, with all that said, I want to thank you guys for watching, and I will see you all in the next video.
Gotta get that Lexia.